English Premier League, and we'll be airing the last fixtures of the Premier League, the last 9, 10 games of the Premier League. And when I mean by 9, that means every week we will be airing one game from the English Premier League. We started this last week, and we are continuing week before last. Last week was the FA Cup, and today we are back, and we are featuring, our featured game today is, of course, Brighton Hove Albion versus Fulham in a tie which sees 8th place Brighton take on 9th place Fulham at the Amex Stadium in what is expected to be an enticing encounter, looking at the position of the two teams and, of course, the recent form of the two sides, that is Brighton and Fulham. And what makes it more interesting is, of course, we all know our own Yankuba Minte is starting, and that's the biggest team news for us in the Gambia, that Yankuba Minte starts his 23rd Premier League game for Brighton Hove and Albion, hoping to extend his goal tally of 5 in his debut season for the Seagulls. Well, I am Modest Jalo, and of course, I have in the studio no other person than the head coach of the Gambian national team, the Scorpions, Johnathan Mckinstry. Johnathan, it's good to have you on this analysis of the English Premier League, and you've been our first match analyzer for the day today.
No, thank you very much. I was really pleased to get the invitation to come down, and as you said, with Yankuba starting in the game, I'm expecting a very good game between two teams who are right in form, but obviously that local interest here in the Gambia for Yankuba to be playing, another person who's in really good form himself. I just think it's all set up for a really interesting game for the fans.
Indeed. We had 6 Premier League games playing this Saturday earlier in the early kickoff. Manchester City were losing, I just have to confirm that, to Brighton by a goal to nil in the 94th minute. We'll confirm that shortly. Then we have another 5 more games to come for you. But our featured game, like I said, is Brighton versus Fulham at the Amex Stadium. 8th position versus 9th position, coming to you live on the Gambia radio and television services. The Premier League is back on your screens on the national television. Johnny, tough game, looking at the position of the two teams, each hoping to win to break into the top 6 of the Premier League. And looking at the form of the two teams coming into this game makes it a bit mouth-watering.
Yeah, I think it's, like I said already, I think it's a really good tie, we're expecting between the two teams, but also the history coming into it, because recent form, Brighton 5 games winning back-to-back in all competitions. In terms of Fulham, also in really good form. Both teams have went through to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup. Brighton are probably in slightly better form by a little bit than Fulham, but then you look at the record between the two teams. In the last 5 games between the two of them, Fulham have won 4 of them, and the other one was a draw. So in essence, they are the ultimate bogey team for Brighton. And you've got 2 very contrasting styles. The young Brighton coach has them playing this, a lot of flair, a lot of combinations, whereas Silva at Fulham has a really well-disciplined, organised team who like to play on the counter-attack. So there's just so many narratives to the game that I'm looking forward to a really entertaining 90 minutes.
Yeah, and like you talked about the two teams, it's looking at the team selections for the game, not much changes on both sides, and we expect the same pattern, a more attacking, more entertaining Brighton side. We have Minte playing alongside Ruta and of course Mitoma, and ahead of them you have João Pedro, which is the normal lineup one would have expected coming into this game.
Yeah, I think the one thing that will be interesting for the game is Lewis Dunk being out for Brighton. Brighton are a team who really like to play on the front foot. They like to have a high defensive line, and actually that's been the thing that Fulham have capitalised on in the past, is being organised defensively and waiting for the little positional maybe mistakes by Brighton to catch them on the counter-attack. And Lewis Dunk is such an important part for Brighton in terms of just organising to make sure people aren't being overconfident with their positioning. And so I think that could be part of the story today, is that they've had to make a change around in the centre of defence, Brighton. But look, it's one of those ones, if Brighton can get a goal early, it means that Fulham are going to have to come out a little bit more. They're not going to be able to sit in that low mid block that they normally do against them. But, let's see when it kicks off. I think the opening 10 minutes is going to really tell us what type of game we're going to have, but I think it's one that all the supporters are going to enjoy.
Talking about the absence of Louis Dunk at the back, Brighton might also seems a bit light on the right-hand side of the field, the right half back, because we have Veltman, who is out injured. Lamte, who has been playing in the last few games, is also suspended. So it means Fabian Husler is forced to adjust, and Hinchelsworth comes in there. How might that help Fulham?
Yeah, I think one of the things that on that right-hand side especially is you've sort of seen in recent weeks the evolving role of our own Yankuba Minte in terms of having a bit more defensive responsibility, but equally because he has, the likes of Lamte and others able to cover for him when he goes to be really offensive, really aggressive in attack. So I do think you're probably going to see quite a disciplined performance from Yankuba today. I think maybe supporters want to see him up in the attacking half of the field, taking people on 1v1. But I'm sure because of those players you've named who are out, I'm sure Yankuba is also, the coach is going to stress to him the need for his defensive responsibilities as well as his attacking ones.
Good. Talking about Minte, he's clicked into gear at the right moment for Brighton. We have seen him being nominated for the Player of the Month for December, which is quite commendable, looking at the names in that list. And also scoring some great goals and some big goals against some big teams. How important is his development and his hitting the right gear at the right moment for Brighton?
Yeah, look, I think Yankuba's development this year has been really impressive. Going to the English Premier League from the Dutch League is not an easy step. You've seen many players who've stood out in the Eredivisie and in Holland coming to the English Premier League and not doing well. Especially attacking players, lots of goals scored in the Netherlands. They then come to the Premier League and it hasn't really clicked for them. So it wasn't a given that a breakout season for Feyenoord last year would lead to a similar season here. But I think you've seen the development. It was stunted a little bit. Obviously an injury sort of midway through the first half of the season meant he was out for a little bit. But now back to full fitness, you're really seeing the best of Yankuba. And yeah, look, he's learning all the time. He's nowhere near the finished article. I think we would all agree on that. But he's in a really rich vein of form at the moment. He clearly has the trust of his coach. I think it helps that Brighton can be quite dynamic with Matoma on the opposite side. It's not like they only have one outlet. They can go left or right. And so opposition teams, they can't just focus on one side of the field, because if they focus on the left side, Brighton can switch it out to the right and vice versa. So yeah, I think Yankuba's development's been really good. I think he's obviously got 7 or 8 goal contributions this year, like you said, 5 goals and 3 or 4 assists, and that's really good for a 20-year-old. In the Premier League, there's not many 20-year-olds are hitting those numbers.
Looking at the teams he scored against, these are some of the biggest names in in English football. Tottenham, he scored in the 3-2 win. He got a brace against Chelsea the other day, and of course scored at Old Trafford, which is a dream for obviously a lot of players. What is that telling us about the lad?
Well, I think one of the things, and obviously people only see professional footballers from the outside, but what we see on the inside as coaches who are close to the situation is the mindset. So Yankuba is one of those guys whose mindset, he's an ultra serious player. I know some people pick up on the fact that when he gets substituted, he never seems happy, but that's because he wants to play. He is serious about the game. He wants to help his team. He wants to have that positive input. On the training field, away from the training field, he's so serious about his craft. It's a pleasure to see as a coach, because not all young players are like that. Some young players, just think, oh, I'm talented, this will come naturally. But for him, he knows he has to work at it every day, despite his talent. And so I think what we're seeing is when those big games come up, he rises to the challenge, which is really important. But also I'm sure his coaching staff there will also be saying, well, let's make sure we don't just reserve those goals and big performances for the gold ribbon games. Let's make sure when we're playing against the teams in and around us and the teams at the bottom of the league, we're also putting in those contributions. But I think today, even though it's not against one of the historically big teams, absolutely focused on getting the 3 points today.
A battle between two good coaches in Marco Silva, who's doing very well with Fulham, and of course, the young German, the youngest coach in your bracket. The youngest coach is coming up and stepping up. What do we expect from the two coaches in this game?
I think it's interesting because I think you look at Brighton and their young coach. He is so, he has a philosophy, has an idea about the game, and Brighton are a team that will stick to their philosophy. And you've seen sometimes, as they've been learning throughout the season, they've made some errors defensively. They've conceded some goals that, some people might have criticised by saying, oh, just play forward, get it away from the danger zone. But Brighton are committed, and their coach is committed to this style of football. Even when they lost 7-0, you might think for some coaches that would be a point to reflect and say, okay, do we need to change something? But no, Brighton doubled down on their approach, and they've had 5 wins back-to-back since that huge defeat. So that's great credit to them. In Silva at Fulham, you see more of the pragmatist. He's a very experienced Premier League coach, obviously Everton, Hull, now at Fulham, and he's someone who knows how to win in the Premier League. He knows what to do to get the points on the board. And so that's what I mean. His teams are very well organized. He doesn't look, they're maybe not the most exciting teams to watch all of the time, but they're extremely effective. So I think you see two very different coaching strategies coming into play today. And for me as a coach, it's interesting to watch that because, the decisions that the two of them make during the game and how they change things and how they react to things, I think is going to have a big bearing on the final outcome.
You have Jimenez, Iwobi, and Smith Rowe starts up front for Fulham. That is also an exciting attacking lineup.
Yeah, look, Raul Jimenez has been in great form this year. He's been scoring goals, he's been linking the play up, and in Iwobi and Smith Rowe, just what they're doing in terms of when they decide to go and press, how they link the play up. Like Alex Iwobi's a player who, obviously in his early days, in his professional career really broke through onto the scene, but maybe sort of plateaued for a little bit. And now at Fulham is really finding himself again and is a real key component to almost everything they do. So if he has a good game today, then you would expect Fulham to have a good game today. So yeah, I think he's one that Brighton have to watch out for and make sure that Iwobi doesn't get on the ball too much today.
Good. So what sort of a game are we expecting? Would it be an end-to-end affair, or we have Fulham sitting and trying to watch Brighton play?
I think it won't be far away from that. I think Brighton, you can expect them to dominate the possession. Fulham are happy to concede possession. Just because you don't have possession doesn't mean you're not in control of a football match. You can be in control because the other team are maybe passing and possessing the ball in areas that aren't going to hurt you. And so I think Fulham will largely be happy to concede possession to Brighton and say, okay, you can have the ball, but we're going to set up in this 4-4-1-1 formation most likely, and you're not going to be able to break us down. And they're going to invite Brighton probably to come forward. They're going to invite numbers high so that when they win the ball, they can explosively counter into the space. And also set pieces. Fulham set pieces are a big part of the game for Brighton as well. Brighton are quite innovative with their set pieces. But yeah, I think today is going to be a game where you can expect Brighton to have more of the ball, but that doesn't mean they'll have more of the chances, because good chances can sometimes come from
Premier League weekend. You have the chance to watch a Premier League game here on the Gambia radio and television services. We have 6 Premier League games playing today. Earlier on, in the early kickoff, Manchester City, the champions, continues to struggle as they lost 1-0 to Nottingham Forest. And our featured game is Brighton, Yankuba Minta's Brighton versus Fulham. And the big team news is that Minter starts in his 23rd Premier League game for Brighton over Albion. City losing.
It's been some season for City this year, really. You know, I don't think anybody saw it coming. Obviously, at the beginning of the season, when Rodri went out injured, everyone thought that that was going to be a challenge. But bringing Gundogan back into the club was felt to sort of plug that gap a little bit. But yeah, it's been one of those big challenges. You know, football goes through phases. You know, there was a period, and Pep Guardiola was probably the father of this in the modern age in terms of that possession, positional type of football. Whereas I think what you've seen in the last 2 to 3 years has been the re-emergence of that really aggressive, high-intensity style of football where people really get high, go man for man, and sometimes if you can employ that man for man pressing approach, it can really stifle a positional play approach to the game. And so yeah, look, it's been a really tough season for City. I know they're probably going to regroup and go again in the summer in terms of the transfer market, but I just mentioned to you about the game we're watching in terms of being not having the ball, not having possession doesn't mean you're in control. You know, I quickly glanced at the statistics from the Forest City game. Forest only had 30% of the ball. You know, they only had 30% of the ball, yet I'm just looking here, they still had 9 shots. Even with 30% of the ball. So I think that shows you that even without the ball, if you have a clear strategy and you know, right, we're going to win it in these areas of the field and this is how we're going to attack sort of incisively, surgically against our opponents, you can get your chances. So
just like we showed in the Champions League, Liverpool and
yeah, absolutely.
PSG.
Yeah, look, not all games are the same. And again, Liverpool, you know, they needed a big performance from Alisson in goals. He made some big saves, and you know, sometimes it's not. It was a great goal they scored against PSG, but it's not like it was 50 passes to score the goal. It was a long kick from Alisson, good combination play, and goal. You know, 3 or 4 passes, and it's in the back of the net. So you know, great, you know, fantastic football doesn't always involve 20 passes. Sometimes it can be back to front in that really incisive, direct manner in 3 or 4 passes, and it's a goal.
Interesting. But the City case, what do you think? What is actually the problem? What do you think is the problem? Yes, generations comes and pass, like you said, but we have injuries with Rodri, of course, their key player, the world best player. But does it go beyond that?
Look, I just think everything goes in cycles. You know, even the great Manchester United team under Sir Alex Ferguson, you know, they didn't win it every single year. There was years where Arsenal came up and won it, and then Chelsea came and won it. But the great thing about dynasties, about legacy teams, is even when they get that setback, they come roaring back the next season. And I think, you know, when you look back into the 70s and 80s, the great Liverpool team, when you look into the 90s and 2000s of Manchester United, which I would consider those the legacy teams. Yes, we've had Chelsea, yes, we've had, you know, Arsenal, but I wouldn't necessarily consider their periods of dominance legacy, because when they sort of went to the side again, they didn't come roaring back in the same way. And so I think now is the challenge for Manchester City, because they've won 4 championships back to back. No one's ever done that in the Premier League era. You have a treble season as well. So now they've achieved everything that could possibly be achieved. This season's been a real sort of slap in the face for them. And, you know, Pep Guardiola, the best coach in the world over the last 20 years, will no doubt have a plan for next season, and I expect them to get into the transfer market. And look, it's going to need refreshing.
They've already been in the transfer market.
Yeah, true, but I think what's happened to a degree is that they've replenished the supporting cast, whereas they haven't necessarily replenished the lead actors. You know, if you look at the likes of De Bruyne, you know, clearly they would still like him to be a lead actor. But is he, look, he's still a marvellous player. No one should ever doubt that. But is he on the downwards side of the mountain rather than at the peak of it anymore? And so I think now, obviously Erling Haaland is still a very young player. He's got many years. I think he's got another 8 or 9 years on his Manchester City contract. So he's got many years ahead of him. But I think some of the other lead members of that all-star cast,
Ederson,
I think you'll see it changing around.
Walker has decided to jump the ship before.
Yeah. But look, it happens to everybody. It happens to all great teams. It happened to Manchester United. It happened, obviously, Bayern Munich last season. You see Juventus and Inter Milan have those challenges, Barcelona, Real Madrid at different times. So it happens to all great teams. But we also have to give credit to some of the other teams in the league, not just the big names like Liverpool, but also the likes of Nottingham Forest, who won today, a team who 18 months ago were signing everybody under the sun, and you might have thought, what's going on here? This is not the way to do it. But actually they've got it right, and Nuno Espirito Santos there at Forest is doing a fantastic job, and they're, I think, destined for European football, which
as you can see, the teams are already out on the dugout. Brighton taking on the Fulham at the Amex Stadium in the English Premier League. There is also Liverpool taking on Southampton. You have Crystal Palace playing Ipswich, and then you have Brentford taking on Aston Villa. And Wolverhampton will be playing Everton. That is at 8 p.m. But our featured game is Brighton versus Fulham. And as you can see, I am in my Minte jersey and hoping he deliver another stellar performance. Are we expecting to see another stellar performance from Minte?
For me, I'm going to put my national team hat on. I want two things. I want a good performance from Yankuba, and I want him to come off the game healthy, because us national team coaches in the final
50 years of combined history, and both stand on the brink of possibly their best ever seasons.
Yankuba is what I'm praying for.
All right, we watched the first half at the Amex Stadium between Brighton
anywhere. OneXBet app at the heart of the game.
More defensive problem. Hertzler, who continues to be out. Lewis Joel Verbruggen held his hand up for Fulham's first goal in Brighton's defeat back in December. The latest defender missing is Tariq Lamptey, sent off in the FA Cup tie at Newcastle. Jack Hinchelwood moves to right back. After his drop, João Pedro will be looking in a third successive game today. And looking to score for a third game running from the subs bench, Danny